All right. So coming to the main thing, I think right now, if I were to look at it from a perspective of R1, R2, the bigger question to ask over here is, whether you have taken the GMAT. The reason I'm saying that is if this is the key question, because I feel that if you have already taken the GMAT and if you already have a great score, probably you would have, ended up applying earlier. So the way I see it is one of, a few, conditions over here. A, you took the GMAT, but you perhaps took the GMAT a little late. So you are kind of in a scenario where you don't have enough time to apply to these B schools, right? You feel it's kind of, at the end of it. So that's one possibility. The second possibility, you took the GMAT, but you perhaps did not score as well as you would have liked to. So that's the second case. The third case is, your prep has been going on, but unfortunately, you couldn't take it so far. You probably have planned to take it somewhere in September. You are worried that you might miss the deadline for R1. You are thinking whether R2 is for me. And there could be a third type, which is, I haven't taken it, but I just am curious to know whether, there is a difference between the two rounds and what I should do, for each round. So before we get into this, let us understand one thing, which is, the whole MBA journey is a probability game, right? I want you to think about it this way, right? It's a probability game, which means that there is nothing like 100% probability. No matter how good your profile is, there is no guarantee that you will get into a particular school. And to be honest, if there is a guarantee that you want to get into that school, you probably are shooting very low, correct? So my suggestion would be apply to a school that is high enough where there is at least a probability game. There should always be this feeling that, I may not get in, which means that if you do get in, then you actually feel happy about it. What I've seen a lot of students do is that, they end up, sometimes applying to what are called as safe schools, right? Schools where the probability of admission is almost guaranteed they get in. And once they get in, they say, hey, what is this here? I mean, I feel that, I just applied and I got in. There is really no effort involved, correct? And that's what kind of sometimes comes back to bite you, right? Like, oh, I wish I had applied to a school that was slightly more ambitious. On the other hand, what I've also seen is, students who have this attitude that, I'm going to apply only to the best schools in the world. And if I don't get in, I'll get into one of the top 10 schools. I want to get into one of the top 10 schools in the world. See, the problem with that is, yeah, it is aspirationally, everybody wants to get into Harvard, right? I mean, there is no denying that. But what you have to understand is that, there are certain things that makes Harvard rare, right? That is what makes it precious. If something were to be easy, then it's not precious, right? So what makes it precious is that it kind of is very tough to get in because everyone who's applying has great profiles, great GMAT scores, great stories. Right. So again, I'm not saying that your probability is zero, but your probability is going to be above zero and below 100. In most cases, when we apply to a B school, our probability is going to be, 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%. And think about it. Probability, what I'm saying is really the chances of you getting in, right? But remember, you have only one shot, which means that either you get selected or you get rejected. If you get selected, you will never get to know whether you had a 80% probability or a 20% probability after which you got in. Or if you get rejected, you don't know how close you were to the whole rejection thing, correct? So the first thing that I would like you to think of is MBA application is a probability game. And our job is to ensure that we improve our probability of getting into a B school, correct? I want you to remember that. Our job is to improve our probability of getting into a B school. Now, before I get into R1, R2 discussion and why, specifically for this, it's important for you to understand that if I am a part of the admissions committee, correct, you have to understand what are my KPIs. Correct? What is my KPI? as as an admission consultant. And if you think about it, there are really two things that an MBA admission consultant does, right, or has to really worry about. The first thing that the person has to worry about is what is called as acceptance rate, right? So what I want to do is I want to have as low an acceptance rate as possible. Now, what is acceptance rate? Acceptance rate is nothing but the total number of people who get in divided by the total number of people who apply, correct? So think about it. Numerator is people who get admitted and denominator is people who end up applying to that school. Now, the numerator cannot be changed because every year there are only so many seats that a school has to offer, correct? So the only way for me to decrease the acceptance rate and make it look like it's a very selective college, right? Because you want to go to a place that looks like a selective college, like a college that doesn't take just everyone, right? So in that case, what will happen is I will try to see how do I increase my denominator, correct? So the number of admits is constant, but how do I make more people apply to my course? So if I'm accepting 100 people and if 200 people apply, right, really, it's a 50% acceptance rate. But if 1,000 people apply, then my acceptance rate goes down to 10%. Now, many of the top schools in the world boast of a single-digit admission acceptance rate, right? For example, Stanford is, I think, 6 or 7% acceptance rate, which, by the way, for Indians is a lot lower. So that is the global average, which means that you applying as a Somalian or you applying from sub-Saharan Africa or some, small country like Tuvalu, right? Your chances of getting in go up greatly, right? Because those are all underrepresented countries. So if you are applying from, let's say, Somalia, your probabilities, let's say your acceptance rate is 20%. But if you're applying from India, chances are your acceptance rate is somewhere in the lower single digit, right? Maybe 2 to 3%, not more than that. Now, what is happening is when you talk to admission committee members, right? When you meet them at these education fairs or when you talk to any one of them, remember that this is their KPI. So when they are looking for you to apply, when they encourage you to apply, it is not because they are saying that you will get in, correct? But they are really looking at, how do I get more people to apply? So that's why you'll hear this, right? We strongly encourage you to apply, right? So make sure that you kind of take that with a pinch of salt. Second, they also want to increase the yield rate. Now, what is the yield rate? Yield rate is the number of people who end up, taking a session. So what happens with yield rate is where you have the total number of people accepting the offer divided by the total number of people who have applied or who have gotten into that B school. So I'll say this again, numerator, the people who joined the college divided by the people who were made the offer, correct? Now, I want ideally as a B school, 100% yield rate, which means everyone who got an admission accepted to join the school. Now, that's an ideal case, right? Even a school like Harvard does not have a 100% yield rate. It's more like a 90% yield rate. Now, you might think, okay, who's this guy who rejected Harvard, right? But you have to think that this probably is a guy who got into Stanford with a full scholarship, correct? So the idea is that you understand that these schools are worried that if I make an offer to this guy, would he accept this offer? Or, is he going to say, well, thank you, I'm going to pass it and I'm going to go somewhere else, right? So why is this important? And this we will kind of come back to in a short while when we talk about the difference, in how these schools perceive the round 1 applications to the round 2 applications, right? So what are the pros of applying in round 1? Now, I know that people have, painted this rosy picture that, and I'm going to go back to this. So before I get into the details, but people have presented this picture of, you apply in round one, oh, you'll get in. Array, round one mein apply kiya, to you'll get in, right? Or round two mein you apply, chances go down, you'll get rejected. I think that's far from truth. It's not so binary. It's not like, round one, you'll get in, round two, you'll get rejected. So one thing that I've always maintained is if you're good enough to get into Harvard, for example, or Stanford, you will get into Harvard or Stanford in round one or round two doesn't make a big difference, right? There are other things that matter a lot more than the round that you apply, correct? So I'm not going to subscribe to this very, easy, convenient sentence saying R1 is better than R2. What we will do is let us try to look at the differences between the two rounds, and let's try to see, which rounds make more sense and which rounds we could maximize our chances, right? That's what we are trying to do. We are trying to maximize our probability of getting in. So the first thing, I'm going to start with the easy bit, which is what are the pros of applying in round one, okay? So very clearly, round one gives you a slightly higher chance, okay? Slightly higher chance, and I'll explain why. The reason why round one gives you a highly, by the way, just to kind of clarify, round one is the first round of application, which is around September, October. So let me do this. Let me kind of ask you this question. I think important to understand whether, yeah, so just make sure that everybody is on the same page. All right, great. So just was waiting for people. So, okay, so I see that there are some of you looking at applying in round one, some of you not sure. And I have a few of you asking, what the hell is the difference, or what is R1, R2, correct? So R1 is the first round of application, right? So typically for US schools, you are looking at September, October, and round two is your second round, which typically is around January. September, I'm talking about US schools just to make it easy. Indian schools have, the calendar spread all over, but September, October are round one, and January round two. That's really the two rounds. All right, so what are the pros of applying? First, as I said, that, in terms of R1, EU also, Ranjit, has the same kind of things, right? So there is a earlier, so the first round and the second round, let me just put it simple, right? Whatever the dates be, the first round versus the second round. Now, think of it this way. You just got your salary credited into your bank account, and you end up going to a shop, and you just got the message which says salary credited, and it says your account balance is so and so. And now you go into a shop and you see a nice pair of jeans, and you say, hey, you know what, I've always been thinking, I know I already got like 3 or 4 jeans, but this ripped one looks really cool, so let me go ahead and buy it. You tend to be a lot more you're a lot more confident, okay, of taking a risk. And when I say risk, like spending money. Now think about it. If I were to use the same analogy, and if I were to say, like, this is at the end of the month, you kind of have gone through, like, you had a major expense and you kind of are running a little low on your finance, and then you look at this pair of jeans, you're probably going to say, well, let me look at it, let me give it a second thought, let me sleep over it. Right now, I think I'm probably going to pass this. Now, what happens from a B school perspective is when you go to them in round one, they have all these seats with them. They say, you know what, this year we're going to take like 30 people from India, right? And, I have all these 30, 40 seats with me. And I'm saying, okay, let me try to pick the best Indian who's going to apply and get into the B school. And then you kind of go ahead and see an application which says, your school is the first choice for me, right? And I just love your school, and, given a chance, I'm going to join your school. And plus, I don't know the admission committee doesn't know what to compare this application with. So they say, well, this guy seems to have a great profile and has a lot of, is showing very, is very keen on joining us, correct? So think about their KRA. Think about their KPI, right? They know that if they give admission to this guy, right, who's applied early on, maybe that that yield rate goes up, correct? And secondly, also from a perspective of the fact that they don't really have, a lot of people with similar profiles, so that kind of increases your chance. Now let us look at round two, right? By the time they've come to round two, right, the first question they're going to ask is, hey, you're claiming that we are such a great school and you love us so much and that we are your first choice, blah, blah, blah. Then why did you wait for round two? That means maybe in round one, you apply to other schools and you're treating us as like, your plan B. There is nothing wrong in it, by the way. But I'm just saying that they could say, well, maybe it is not your first round. Maybe you're a person who's just applying to other schools, possibly, correct? Number one. Number two, I have already got this person, this chartered accountant from Mumbai who's like, worked for 3 years in Ernst & Young, right? And now I'm getting another chartered accountant who has worked for 4 years in PwC. Correct? That guy had a 720, this guy has a 730. So there is not really much to differentiate. But since I already have made a decision to pick someone else who's going to join me, I might not make you an offer just because I want to have more diversity in the class. Correct? And that's really why R1 gives you a slightly higher chance if you are applying rather than R2. Okay? So that's the first bit. Okay? I'm not going to be taking questions. And Mani Bhushana Rao, all these questions, please ask, someone in the team and we'll get back in touch. So Shrikla is also part of this. So Shrikla, you can maybe, just make a note of the student and we will reach out separately. Okay. The other advantage that you have when you apply in R1 is that you have ample time to apply for other schools, for other colleges, correct? So let's assume that you applied in R1, right, which is September, October. Now, by October, your deadlines are kind of over, which means that you have the whole of November and December to do two things, okay? 2 months, November and December, you have two things. First, you have to prepare for the interview. Now, preparation for the interview is really an extension of, the whole thing that you have done while writing the essays, right? Which is you're really fine-tuning your whole thought process. So that's not a problem. The second is you have already applied to so many schools. You already have the framework in place. You already have the stories in place. Why wouldn't you apply in case you get rejected, correct? Why wouldn't you apply to, schools in R2? Correct? So you have already worked the essays, so which means it's a lot easier for you to write more essays. Correct? I'll tell you, if you have not done applications, if you have not written your application essays so far, the first 3 schools are the toughest. Okay, the first 3 schools. After you get beyond the first 3 schools or the first 5 schools, right, you'll realize that the process is a lot easier, which means if you apply to 5 schools in round 1, you can potentially apply to even 10 schools in R2 if you are able to play that. So basically what R1 gives you is it gives you a plan B. Okay, that's what it does. Now, I'm going to be, talking about a thing which is going to be a little, by the way, just put all your questions in the Q&A box, please. So I'm going to now talk about something that usually people don't talk about, which is what are the disadvantages of applying in R1? And I'm talking about it not in terms of disadvantages per se, but like what are the things which should, tell you that you should not apply in R1, correct? What are those factors? So the first thing of applying in R1 is, remember, a lot of times, if your profile isn't great, okay, see, you ought to understand that your profile has to be good, your application has to be very strong, right? If your application is weak, R1 is not like, Rumal Daldo, right? You just book a seat by just putting your handkerchief or towel and saying, oh, I applied, I came first. They don't have a first come, first serve policy, remember, in these B schools, correct? In fact, what will happen is if you are a mediocre profile, right, but you kind of applied early and kind of put in your application, chances are you might be waitlisted. And this is something that people don't realize, that waitlist is perhaps a very, very painful process because you don't know whether the school is going to select you or reject you. And typically the schools give you that decision after they see the applications for round 2. Correct? Think about it. So you applied in R1, thinking that you have an advantage, but the school said, look, I'm not sure because your profile isn't, all that great, but I'm not going to reject you because you applied an R1 and, we don't really have a good context of the other pool of applicants. So I'm going to make you wait for the next 4 to 5 months, and I'm going to go through the evaluation for R2 and then compare you and then make the offer. Correct? So being on the wait list can be fairly painful. So sometimes I've seen that students who end up applying an R1, but if they are not really that good, they end up being waitlisted. The second thing is, this is typically what happens by March, April. You realize that, hey, I have to apply this year. Last year also I missed the boat, so let me start. So by March, April, you start your GMAT prep, correct? So, April goes, May goes, June goes. Then by July, you start taking the tests. You realize that, you need more time. Something happens at work. There is like this, spanner that is thrown at, all your this. Finally, you end up taking it in August, but guess what? There is a wedding in the family. You have the GMAT score. You need to now start working on the application. And, days become weeks, week becomes like a month. And before you realize, it's already September, correct? And you wake up in, cold sweat and say, oh man, I have to apply now, correct? And at this point, what happens is that people rush in and they do a shoddy job with the application. Like what I told you earlier, remember that your application, your essays have to tell a story, correct? They have to tell a story who you are, correct? And that takes effort, right? You need to have a clarity. Where is it that you're headed? What are your post-MBA goals? On top of that, you have to do research about the school. You have to understand, a little bit more about the school. You have to connect with alums on LinkedIn. You have to reach out to your recommenders. You have to prepare your one-page CV. I mean, it's a lot, correct? And especially if you're doing it for the first time and you're doing it without professional help, like the one that we offer at CrackVerbal, what happens is it can get very overwhelming, correct? So when you're overwhelmed with a lot of these things, what essentially happens is people tend to panic. People put in a poor application. So here is what I have for your consideration. R1, mediocre application. R2, excellent application. Please pick R2, not R1. Okay? Because what I don't want you to do is rush in your application, put a poor job, do a poor job on that. Because here is one more thing that you need to remember. If you get rejected at a B school, remember the next time that you apply, you are going to be applying as a reapplicant, correct? Which means the B school is going to look at you and say, hey, you know what? I already made an offer. I already spent time, money, effort, looking into your application, looking into your profile. There was something about your profile that I did not like. Okay. There was something in your profile that I did not like, which is why I rejected. Next year, they are going to think about it. It's human nature, right? They are going to say, you know what? I rejected you last year. You come back. Tell me what you did. And in many cases, what happens is there is very little that happens in our life in 6 to 8 months for us to really showcase that, hey, you know what, I've actually done this. Oh, by the way, in the last 6 months, I have to tell you, I won the Nobel Prize, right? It doesn't happen that way, correct? So when you go to them with a, similar application, they said, well, I've already seen you, that also kind of reduces your chance as a reapplicant the next year. So just be conscious of it, right? Just be conscious of these things. And, that's what I would like you to consider. Now, I'm going to talk about what are the advantages of applying in round 2, right? Now, this is like the counterpoint to it. What will happen if you were to apply in round 2? So the first thing is, round 2 gives a chance to improve your application. So if, for example, you have not taken the GMAT, you're planning to retake the GMAT, correct? Or you have taken the GMAT, but you just don't have time, right? And if you feel that, it's already September. By the way, I'm not talking about ISB, okay? ISB is a different ball game. So all of you who are here thinking about ISB, don't worry. ISB round 1, round 2, round 3 doesn't matter, correct? ISB, you apply in any round, your chances are the same. They do say that in R1, the chances of scholarships go up, but I have my own theory around why that is not entirely true. Okay, so that's where I would put ISB. Okay, now in that case, what I would do is I would probably take the opportunity over the next 3 months. So what is my first thing? First thing is to make sure that I have as high a GMAT score as possible. Now, this is something that people don't talk about, but think about it this way, that, you know, most B schools, right, they love being, you know, ranked by these magazines, right? Business Week and, you know, FT, Financial Times, US News. So all these rankings, and plus the student perception, correct? If you are applying to a school with an average GMAT score of 730 as opposed to a school which has an average GMAT score of 630, which B school do you think is quote unquote better? Which one do you think is more promising? You'll obviously say the one which has a 730 average GMAT score, correct? So the whole idea is, so Pranay, just I'm going to stop you on that. There is no difference between ISB round 1, round 2, round 3. Please apply in any of the rounds. As far as ISB is concerned, they have very clearly put up on their site, website, that there is no difference among the rounds. Okay, so don't worry about ISB. R2, you know, what really happens is apply with as high a GMAT score, right? Because of these reasons. Because B schools today are saying, you know what, I'm getting so many guys from IT industry. I get so many guys from finance industry. I get so many people from manufacturing. And I'm talking about India, right? Because India is one of the largest, applicant pools, right? Outside of the US, along with China. So they're going to say, well, if there is one thing that this guy can do to me, how can you help the B school? You can help the B school by increasing their average GMAT score, right? So all things being equal, if you have a higher GMAT score, your chances, your probability of getting into a B school goes up. Okay, I want all of you to remember this, no matter how great. So I've had, you know, students come in, great profile, excellent profile, everything is fine, has a 580 on the GMAT. Unfortunately, there is nothing that we can do. Correct? 580 means, you know, pretty much all the top 30 schools, ISB, IIMs, they're just going to reject you without even reading your application. That's the brutality, right? Think of GMAT score as a guard sitting outside the admission center. Correct? That guard is not going to let you get in, right? So that's the importance of GMAT. So I would work on my GMAT score. That's number one. Number two, I would also make sure that I spend time introspecting on my profile, how to showcase my story, how do I tell my story better. I will also spend time getting clarity about my post-MBA goals. Where do I want to be? How do I get there? So think of, this whole application strategy over the next 2 to 3 months, right? There is a lot that needs to be done. So R2 will definitely give you a chance to improve your application. What is the disadvantage? Well, you have lost time, correct? Let's look at it, right? You have lost time. You're taking a risk because what happens, I've already told you about the probability, but more importantly, if you do not get in, correct? So, you don't have an R3. Technically, there is an R3 in March, right? But I would say for Indian students, better off waiting for another 6-8 months and apply the next year again in round 1, right? So you are taking a risk. What if, let's say, you have a medical emergency? Let's say you fall sick in December. I hope not, okay? I hope not. I really don't wish you ill, but let's say, something happens or there is some social kind of function. Your boss gives you a new project, right? You're banking everything on round 2 now. Correct? All your bets are in this one basket called round 2. You don't have a plan B. So that, according to me, is a big risk when you're applying in round 2. Correct? You really have to get it right in the next 3 months. Okay? You've wasted a few months, I understand, but right now you don't have more time to waste. That's the first, con. And that's the kind of thing that I want you to think of. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over to the questions, and let me see. I have a bunch of questions that you guys have asked me. So let me just go ahead and see if there are any questions that I can answer. I'm not able to click on this. I don't know why. Correct, Sandeep. But ISB scholarship is also, I'm not very sure, just sorry, I'm just trying to see the Q&A window is not opening for me. Yeah, Yogesh, all of this would be recorded. So Shrikla, in case you are able to hear this, if you could just kind of help me with any questions. Let me just go ahead and just 1 second. I'm just removing the share. I'll be sharing it again. Just give me a second. So I think I've got the Q&A over here. So first I have Pamela asking me this: do we need TOEFL for MBA when my undergraduation was in English? Great question, Pamela. So here is what's happened. Many schools do not require the, they do not require the this thing. They do not require you to have a TOEFL score, right? So they are saying, it's perfectly okay. No problem. Don't give us a TOEFL score. We are still happy with it. Correct. And many schools end up saying that no, we do need a TOEFL score. So what I would suggest is just check with the schools, and if you are looking at applying to a school in the US, my suggestion would be for you to take the TOEFL or the IELTS, right? So my suggestion, if you are applying, why take the risk? Some schools still require you to do it. So go ahead and, take it. So Tejas, I attended some of the B school application events. They said there is less chance of getting scholarships in round 2. So here is what happens. What is it that I'm looking at? I'm looking at improving I'm just going to go back to the slide where I spoke about what are the KPIs for an admission committee. How do I increase my acceptance rate? I increase my acceptance rate by giving more scholarships. Now, by the time you come to R2, the admission committee knows that you're desperate, correct? Which is why they are saying that, we will give more scholarships in R1. But having said that, my take, please show me any US school which says scholarships are awarded only in round 1. Not true. They award scholarships in both round 1, and you also have a chance of getting scholarships in R2. But internally, the distribution may be a little lopsided for R1 versus R2. But I've had students apply in R2 and get full scholarships. Okay. I've had students who have got that, in fact, one of my students last year got 100% scholarship in, one of the schools that he applied to in round 2. So please don't worry on that part. Okay. Another question that I have is, does sending scores while writing GMAT previously and applying separately in rounds recount? Yes. So you have to, so when you say reapplication, it is reapplication next year. You can't reapply in different rounds. Okay, so that's the whole idea. You have to apply any round, you have to apply only once, and pretty much that takes care of it, right? You can't apply in the same school, you can't reapply in round 2 after taking the GMAT. So that's my question on the, on the scholarship bit. Adarsh Gupta had this question, which is, since MBA colleges abroad need minimum like 4 years, so which top school going for deferred? Adarsh, depends on the school. My take is schools are okay taking freshers. One thing that I've noticed as a trend is that more and more schools are willing to take the risk of people with fewer years of experience, correct? And they are willing to kind of say, hey, let me give this guy a shot. So we do see a lot of schools going in for that. Satyen had this question: I want to apply in round 2. I want to apply in 2 or 3 colleges in round 1 and 2 or 3 in round 2. How do I decide which colleges to apply in round 1 or round 2? Should I choose higher probability schools in round 1 or save for round 2? See, my suggestion would be, pick schools that you really, really want to get in round 1, correct? So, for example, let us say that you have 2 schools. One is UCLA Anderson and the other is Haas Berkeley. correct? Now, let us say that you say that between Haas Berkeley and UCLA Anderson, I'm going to be taking, Haas Berkeley, right? Would you agree? Haas Berkeley better, ranked than UCLA Anderson. Now, let us say that in round one, you ended up applying to UCLA Anderson, and let's say you got in round one. Now, in round two, you want to apply to Haas Berkeley. But UCLA Anderson, because you applied in round one, is asking you to pay up the caution fees to block your seat, to reserve your seat, reserve your admission. Now that's a hefty sum. What do you do? Correct? So you are in a catch-22 situation that, Array, I want to apply to us, but I have to pay money. So my suggestion is apply to a school that you really want to get in round one. Even if your probability of getting into that school is lower, it is still better because you're giving it your best shot. And because it is a higher ranked school, right, it makes sense for you to apply in round one to give yourself that slight boost in improving your probability. Correct? So most of these websites have the scholarship. There is one question about STEM courses. What I've noticed is a lot of US schools today are making it easy, okay, for people to end up, getting a STEM degree. So they themselves are on, things which essentially help you. Is this there connection? Yeah. So they make it very easy for you to, kind of do so. So that's the one thing that I've noticed about schools. I'm just go through the questions now. All right. So I hope these questions are giving you time. Okay. So I'll just go through the other questions. I have a lot of questions, but I'm just trying to, kind of answer the ones that makes most sense. Shikla, if you can just put in how people can get in touch with us. So you can always write us an email, right? Which is given there. So that way we can take any specific questions. I'm going to take like a few more questions, which are slightly more generic. And this round one, round two, I'm just saying that someone asked, is it okay for INSEAD also? It's okay for INSEAD. Is internship counted as work experience? Yes, it is counted as, it is not counted as work experience if it is going to be, before your graduation. They look at work experience only after graduation. If you haven't taken the GMAT yet, you have another month or so. So I'm not very sure whether in a month you're going to be able to send in your applications. So I would be very wary of it. If I've not taken the GMAT, I would actually look at applying in round two at this point, correct? But you can always go ahead and give it a shot. Someone asked me about 15 years experience. Shouldn't, like, you just need to apply like a normal applicant, tell them why you want to do an MBA. So it's not about you having 15 years experience or 5 years experience, right? It's about the quality of experience. What is the minimum time that I should have between my GMAT and the MBA application deadline? So, my take is, why are you waiting for your GMAT to get over, correct? So don't wait for your GMAT to get over before you start applying. My suggestion would be to apply along with your, or start thinking about application at least along with your GMAT prep, okay? Someone had this question which said, I will take the GMAT. So at this point, I'm going to stop taking questions. So if you can, I'll just answer the few questions. I've got a couple of interesting questions. So I will take the GMAT in mid-October and then go for round two. Do you think my strategy will help me? So if you are taking the GMAT in October, then yeah, you have to go in for R2. There is really no option. You don't need to mention about scholarships in the application. Scholarship decisions are independent of your application. First, they look for the quality of your application. Then they are going to worry about scholarships. Pranay had this question: if I only send the score, did not submit. If you have sent the score, it does not count in as an application, Pranay. Don't worry about it. It is only when you submit the application form are you considered an applicant. Okay. In ISB, yes, the scholarships are given only in R1. But remember, the ISB guys are desperate to get better quality applicants, right? So they know that they are losing out people who are applying to US schools. So they are creating this scholarship, but the scholarship is not that big. And see, the 5 or 10 people who are going to get the scholarships are people with very, very rare profiles, correct? It is not going to be an IT guy or a finance guy. So I would say, except for a few lakhs of scholarship, the full scholarship you're not going to get at ISB, right? If you have a common profile. So it is just a carrot to kind of help you apply. Again, going back to this, they are looking at increasing the application rates. So they are looking at all these people applying to a top school in the US, saying, hey, you know what? I will show them that ISB can also be a backup for you, correct? So I wouldn't worry too much on the scholarship bit over there. Can you give me the approximate deadline, probably a date? So my take the GMAT by October, November. And if you're looking at R2, take it max by October or November, and then end up, applying by January, correct? So I'm also going to be giving you these workshops. So we have these workshops specifically for people who have been studying for the GMAT and who are at the verge of taking the GMAT, but for some reason their scores are not that great, or they are not able to improve on that GMAT scores, and they want to quickly get done with that GMAT so that they can apply to a B school. Okay, and these workshops are advanced workshops where Aditya, who's our quant faculty, and I am the verbal faculty. So both of us will be coming over to Mumbai and Delhi, in a few weeks. And this is going to be intense 2-day workshops, right? From morning till late evening. You're going to be in a room and you're going to be, sitting and solving questions, very intense, especially if you've been, studying for a long time and you want to kind of pull all of it together and, have that intense focus for 2 weekends, right? The workshop is really the program that you should be looking at. Okay. So I'm just going to stick to questions that are on the topic. I see questions around, which one? There is a great question Abhijit had. Is the intake size for R1 and R2 the same? I would believe R1 may be slightly more than R2, but here is the deal. All B schools, I have spoken to admission officers at B schools, and what they tell me is, Arun, I can't give all my seats in R1. My best guy might come in R2. So I am looking at people applying to R2. And the reason I'm giving R2, the reason I'm giving the second round is for people who missed the first round, correct? So, it is not like round 2 is the round of death. The B schools are not crazy, right? Think about it. They want people applying in round 1, which is why, in round 2, which is why they have a round in the first place, correct? So, and then I have a couple of questions on the profile bit. As I said, and Jitesh, a great question. Is there a difference between round 1 and round 2 for, Indian schools? I don't think there is a huge difference. Whatever I'm telling you is, from a US or a European school. In India, you have to understand everybody who's applying is an Indian, correct? So by that nature, it doesn't matter too much. What does a good essay have? I think this is probably, Pamela had this other question, which is the optimum number of schools to apply, correct? Between round 1 and round 2. My take is just first create a list, then make a plan, then make a schedule, rather than at this point thinking too much about it. What I've seen as mistake that people make is when they start their whole application cycle, they think they need to know the list of all the schools and make this into a perfect plan. This cannot be a perfect plan. You have to play it by the year. So look at the first school, apply to the first school, then apply to the second school. So take each school at a time, okay? And maybe towards the end, you can take 2 schools at a time, but no more than 2 schools, correct? And just see what is feasible, what is practical, what is workable, and apply to as many schools as practical, right? That's the whole idea. Apply to schools, only if it makes sense to you. With people with more than 10 years experience, R1 and R2 is not really going to make a huge difference, okay? And it's again, for very unique profiles, R1, R2 is kind of not that big a difference, because you're anyways, you are kind of, in a slightly rare pool. So, R1 versus R2, if your probability of getting in is 1% in R1 is going to be 1% in R2 also. Damodaran had this question. By what you spoke today with the ratios and the percentages, you pretty much sided with R1. Can you please help me? I've already told you, Damodaran, the positives of R2, right? Which is, if your application is not in place, all things being equal, let me just clarify this, okay? All things being equal, if I were to go back to January 2019, okay? This is my advice to you. You're in January 2019. My advice to you, take the GMAT by April, May, spend the month of June and July, August, working on your application, figuring out things. When September deadline comes, apply to schools in R1. That would have been my advice. But remember, we are in September already. 9 months have already passed by, correct? Which is why my advice to you is slightly more practical, saying that, if your probability is not going to be very high with a poor application, increase your probability by applying in round 2 with a better application. And I'm just going to take the last question, which is, if one is planning to apply next year, what should be the schedule? You know what? Next year, why don't you get in touch with us? We'll be answering questions on your profile, right? So excellent. Thanks so much. And again, as I said, anything, please reach out to us. We are glad to take any questions that you may have, right, about this. It was great. Thanks so much for spending an hour on a nice Saturday morning, right? I really appreciate and value your time. Let us stay in touch. Thank you and goodbye.